Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat, and I'm joined by my friend, Professor Richard Leduc.
Hello, Gerrit. I'm excited for this episode. We're going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart toward the middle or end. We'll see how far we get with Paul Bunyan, but or John Bunyan.
It really
any
just
of the
depends on
Bunyans,
what Babe the Blue Ox has to say about things.
or any of the Bunyans, or a Bunyan in general on your foot. We're going to cover all the Bunyans today, but I appreciate you letting me talk about something that's near and dear to my heart. Eventually, later on, if
We'll
there's
see.
time.
We'll see it. We'll see if it pans out. If you're listening to this and it's edited,
We didn't get to it.
yeah. Well, and we don't really do any editing, so
So we do have here, starting with the Phoebe Draper Palmer Brown mailbag, and I apologize, I'm a little congested. I sound like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer when he has the fake nose.
yeah.
But she thinks I'm cute.
The way I talk?
So it starts, this email comes to us from Dan in California. Dear Gerrit and Richard, I chuckled while listening to you tell of a Hmong-speaking friend bearing his testimony of the Holy Ghost speaking to your mind and liver. I am happy to confirm that your friend is absolutely telling the truth in Hmong. Now, Gerrit, you know that I'm fairly fluent in Hmong.
Yeah,
And so my pronunciation of these Hmong terms will be
There's
nearly
literally
flawless.
every Hmong listener we have will be canceling their premium subscription.
So in Hmong, Lub Sayab, which is exactly how it's pronounced, is the main emotion.
There's no way that you just said that right. We're gonna need you to write back, Dan, to tell us how wrong Richard pronounced
Write
that.
it phonetically.
Yeah.
So Lub Sayab, that has, yeah, I'm pretty sure that that was perfect. In the main, look, I'm super congested. Look at that. Is the main emotion for your body, and it translates as the liver. In fact, a common put down is to refer to a person as having a Sayab fem or evil liver.
Oh man, I know that I've called you that a few times.
This is true.
I've been like, I'm so tired of your evil liver.
Did you know your dad, was he a liver and onions guy?
Oh
That's what I consider evil liver.
yeah. My mom loved liver and onions, and my dad liked it. My mom still enjoys it. She still enjoys a good liver and onions.
What was it your dad? Onions and milk? What did your dad?
My dad, yes, he would eat onions and with milk in it, as if it was like a cereal. Yeah. He grew up during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, and so to him, if you have an onion,
What kind of, was it a Walla Walla? Was it a red? Was it a sweet yellow?
I think at the point that you're putting buttermilk over onions.
It was not. It was buttermilk.
I don't know. I know he drank buttermilk. He drank buttermilk by the cup. He loved
That's
buttermilk.
not possible.
Loved it. No, he did.
Well, look, I'm
going to need to have Renee.
At my grandparents' house, I went and poured myself a glass of milk, not knowing, I was like 5, not knowing there was a difference between the types
Milk
of
and
milks.
buttermilk. Yeah.
Yes,
Because butter, good. Milk,
Great.
great. Buttermilk,
nasty crap.
the nastiest thing you've ever tasted in your life. I mean, and why would you even call it buttermilk?
I don't know.
I
Trying to
mean, we
trick
need
a
to talk to
5-year-old.
your wife. She grew up on a dairy farm. How much buttermilk do you think Becky drank?
I don't know. What do you think, Beck, who's here with us now?
But ignoring us.
8 gallons a day. So many gallons.
7 or 8 gallons of butter.
She's organizing our photos right now in Google Photos. All right, translates to liver, Sayab fem, evil liver. That is the English equivalent to telling someone that they have a bad or evil heart. Conversely, the phrase zu Sayab translates to good liver and means happy. I served a Hmong-speaking mission in Central California and was blessed to return 15 years later to my former mission to live and work.
Cool.
The Hmong ward where I served is still part of my current stake and is thriving with some of the best and strongest members I've ever known. We recently had a Hmong-speaking patriarch called to serve the church members in the region who wish to have their patriarchal blessings given in Hmong. The history of the Hmong people in the church is an amazing one. One other side note, as a missionary, I was blessed to attend several Hmong member patriarchal blessings and was surprised to hear that many of them were from the tribe of Asher. The fact certainly got our missionary imaginations going. Just goes to show the gathering of Israel. Thank you both for your wonderful podcast. I've enjoyed listening to it for several years now and appreciate the mix of history, humor, and testimony. It has truly been a blessing in my life. Sincerely, Dan. Thank you, Dan.
Where was Dan emailing us from?
From California, Clovis, California.
All right. How about that?
There you go.
Who knew that we could have as many episodes about Hmong speaking as we did?
No one.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like what our listeners come to the podcast for is, first of all, they come for the humor.
Yes.
Yeah. Second of all, they come for Hmong language advice.
We're huge in Southeast Asia, though. Huge.
I mean, I don't know what our downloads are in Cambodia and Vietnam. I have a pretty good guess what they are in Laos and Vietnam, actually. But I'm guessing 0. Yeah.
This next email comes to us from Branson. He starts with, "It's me, Branson."
I think you need to read the subject line of that, though.
Polygamy in Vietnam. So speaking of, Genrith and Grand Viceroy de Tooth.
He is making a mockery of the fact that no one ever spells or pronounces our name correctly.
So
yeah.
Polygamy in Vietnam. It's me, Branson, the guy who wanted you to lie to us about some awesome Porter Rockwell stories. I still want that. First thing, one of my favorite things to do recently is look at the AI-generated chapters that Spotify gives me while listening to you guys ramble. See attached picture.
Ramble?
So
boy, he's shot across the bow.
We just spent 3 minutes talking about onions and buttermilk.
Well, only because Becky wouldn't answer how much buttermilk she had to drink when she was a kid.
So the image that he shows here is of a Condemned to Repeated episode. And in the Condemned to Repeated episode, one of the chapters is called Polygamy in Vietnam. A couple of things to note. Polygamy in Vietnam is a chapter in the Treaty of Paris episode. I'm glad I know how huge of a role that played in ending the Revolutionary War. Thanks. Additionally, note that I only listen on 1.4x speed or higher. I tried normal speed recently, and it was way too slow.
Wow. I feel
funny.
like Branson...
He's coming in
how much coffee is he drinking that he has to listen? That the slowest he can listen to something is 1.4?
Well, so it's like that with me listening to conference talks if I'm not listening on 1.5, I feel like they're doing it in slow motion.
So you need like Elder Bednar to sound like a squirrel? I mean, is it like Alvin and the Chipmunks to you?
I don't have it like 3, yeah. President Oaks is saying all he wants is a hula hoop.
Yeah. Me, I want a hula.
Well, so I went actually to the transcript to try and find out because when we saw this, we're like, what are you?
Yeah, we didn't reference polygamy in Vietnam. What is the AI transcript doing?
Well, we kind of did. So in this, I was asking Gerrit about the Vietnam. They use similar tactics to the Fabian strategy that Washington used. You just drag the war out. Eventually, it becomes too expensive, and the people lose the will, and you win.
Yeah.
And so that they talked. So Gerrit was talking about that a little bit, and then saying how we're eventually going to get to the Vietnam War. And I said we'll get to polygamy before we get to the Vietnam War, and AI created a chapter then saying Vietnam polygamy.
I think that's because on our Condemned to Repeated, that's some of the premium content. It's American history. We are, we're going maybe at a slower pace than Richard originally anticipated. I think we had somewhere around 12 episodes on the Revolutionary War.
We spent yeah, you're probably right. It's actually probably a little more than that.
Okay, more like 15 episodes
More
on the
like
Revolutionary
20
War.
episodes on that. You hit slavery quickly, and then we got right in.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to know more about the Revolutionary War?
It's been fascinating for me. I've learned so much, as I didn't know any of that stuff before.
And now we're talking about the Articles of Confederation. We're pretty quickly going to get to Shays' Rebellion. What else could someone want?
Well, we're going to spend 3 years on the Federalist Papers. We're going to read them all word for word.
We're going to read one Federalist paper and pick one that wasn't good and call that the Federalist Papers.
Yeah, by Jay.
Yeah, John Jay.
John Jay. Yeah. That'll be the one we read.
Chief Justice.
Yes. All right. Secondly, I sent y'all an email in the past and have done a bit of research since. But by the way, noticing the y'all there, so I've got graduation coming up in December. I'm hoping to be able to graduate in December. And I went with my wife and I purchased all Western gear head to toe. I am absolutely dudded out so that when I go to walk, I'll be in full cowboy regalia.
So we went on a combined family vacation, and for one of the nights, it was elegant night on the cruise ship where you're supposed to dress up and look good. Yep. Richard packed his cowboy attire. Yep. And in complete with bolo tie and gigantic, oversized "Don't Tread on Me" belt buckle. He in all of the pictures, he's brandishing the belt buckle as if it is, I don't know.
As I got it for roping.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as if you just won the Dodge National Circuit Finals.
It's true.
And yeah, but he just bought the belt buckle. He has not as much rodeo experience as he wants people to believe.
And I drive an electric car. I couldn't have been further away. I had to sell my Dodge Ram pickup. I may have mentioned this before. It was a dark
I find
sad
it interesting that you kept the Dodge Ram pickup right up until you became an Oklahoma State cowboy and then got rid of it for an electric car. It's very interesting.
I have a long commute. Anyway, so I'm pasting it again below. So he asked a question, wanted some information. I'm pasting it again below. I want to know how Paul Bunyan wrote the Book of Mormon. That's his question.
Okay.
All right. So while surfing through some extreme, and by the way, we do appreciate, so in this particular case, we didn't get to the email, right?
Yeah.
Well, and we read it, but not on the air. He still has the same question, reposted it.
Yeah.
There you go. Just persistence pays off.
Maybe.
We'll see.
There's like 70 people listening right now. They're like, I've emailed them like 17 times. They haven't even acknowledged me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
mainly
true.
Because it's like, tell me what your address is. I'm coming to your house.
While surfing through some extreme anti-Mormon subreddits, 360 gainer kickflip off of the top of a 20-foot wall, and mocking bad anti-Mormon theories, I ran into one that I was not familiar with. Joseph used John Bunyan's stories as a source for the Book of Mormon. After doing some research and finding that John Bunyan and Paul Bunyan were different people, I did some more research.
Do research to find that out.
I did. Now, I love the idea of Paul Bunyan being the person that actually wrote the Book of Mormon. I love that so much. I almost want that to be partially true. I did some more research and found that theories surrounding this have been around since Eber Howe's anti-Mormon reign. I didn't find a lot more about it, though. Would you mind spending some time hashing it out? And then he sends us a website to an article about it. They claim that striking similarities between the Book of Mormon's Abinadi and Lehi, specifically to some of Bunyan's characters. They do at least note the remarkable feat of Joseph doing it without notes, but compare it to how oral stories by Homer were passed on. So the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Book of Mormon.
And first, John Bunyan. Yeah. So I'm going to guess that the majority of people that are listeners have not really, they've probably not even heard of John Bunyan. I mean, they've maybe heard of the foot problem of Bunyan, or maybe they certainly heard of Paul Bunyan.
Oh,
because who doesn't wish they had a gigantic blue ox as your friend? And, I think also The Simpsons did a lot of, Paul Bunyan stories that made it even easier to remember. But John Bunyan is probably one of the most popular English authors that you don't know who they are. That's what I would guess, right? Because if I were to say, Shakespeare, you'd
Sure.
know who Shakespeare was.
Yeah.
If I were to say Milton, you would know who Milton was. If I were to say, John Donne, or you'd know who those people were.
You're giving me a lot of credit on the last couple, but yeah.
Becky would know who those people were.
Sure, Becky would. She reads.
But John Bunyan, not so much. But his books, well, in particular, one of his books was incredibly popular when it was written. And the one that's the most famous is the Pilgrim's Progress. Now, that kind of sounds like it's going to be a story about, when they land on Plymouth Rock and the Puritans are setting things up. But the reality is, it's a book that is a Christian-centered book. Now, Paul Bunyan is a Puritan, and he actually serves in the military during the English Civil War. So if I don't know if I'm saying if you recall, did I ever talk about the English Civil War on this podcast? I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure I did indirectly.
Yeah, but on the Condemned to Repeat It, you spent a decent amount of time talking about Oliver Cromwell. And
yes, so the English Civil War is essentially, there's a lot of reasons for it, but it in essence pits the Parliament, which is primarily Puritan, against the Royalists and the King, who's of course maintaining the standard Church of England. So it's both religious and political and economic. Like all things, there's all kinds of things that are in there. And when he's just basically a teenager, I keep wanting to say Paul Bunyan instead of John Bunyan. See, now that's a problem. I never would have said Paul Bunyan before, but Branson did this.
He did this.
Branson did this to us. Bunyan serves in the parliamentarian forces, so he's one of the Roundheads in the English Civil War. And afterwards, you have the Cromwell dictatorship, and then there's the restoration of the monarchy, and Charles II becomes king again. Surprisingly, Charles II, not super big fan of the Puritans who executed his father. And so while he is relatively soft at first, he increasingly becomes more... he increases his persecution of Puritans. And one of the people who finds themselves on the negative side of these persecutions is John Bunyan. John Bunyan's actually going to be in jail for 12 years because he refuses to be what's called a conformist, meaning what the Church of England required of people was for everyone to take this oath, adhering to the fact that the king was the head of the Church of England. Well, when you think the king is a terrible apostate, you get a whole bunch of people saying, you know what, I don't think I'm going to take that oath. And so Bunyan is what's called a nonconformist, right? Because he won't conform, and he is thrown in jail. Well, while he's in jail, he has lots of experiences, but also he does a lot of writing. And the end result of what he writes, the big book that he writes, is the book Pilgrim's Progress. And you can see why someone might, taking it at a glance, say, oh, well, that sounds very similar to parts of the Book of Mormon. In fact, let's go to Pilgrim's Progress real quick. Let's just pull that up, and we'll read part of how it starts. So the author is going to tell you that they're having that everything that you're about to read is something that basically took place in a dream. But this is how it starts. As I walked through the wilderness of this world, I lighted on a certain place where was a den, and laid me down in that certain place to sleep. And as I slept, I dreamed a dream. What?
So had dreams...
I dreamed a dream.
So had dreams ever been discussed in literature to this point?
So never, obviously. No one's ever said the phrase, I dreamed a dream, except for, of course, Lehi in the Book of Mormon.
Right, and also from Les Mis.
Well, yeah, see, that's the thing.
So, but they stole that from Lehi, or they stole that from this? Which, well, it stole it from him because obviously Joseph stole it from this.
Is the play is written only in the last half century, so I'm sure they're stealing it from lots of things.
Okay, so Joseph didn't. You're saying you know for certain that Joseph didn't get parts of the Book of Mormon from the play Les Mis.
I'm certain,
Wow.
or the book that Victor Hugo wrote.
Okay.
Because he lived after Joseph Smith. And wrote his book after Joseph.
Okay. All right.
Well, so I can see why someone casually reading that first sentence, because when they read the words, I dreamed a dream, what are they thinking? If you happen to be a Latter-day Saint. Isn't that exactly what Lehi tells his family? Behold, I've dreamed a dream. Or in other words, I've seen a vision, right?
Yep.
Yeah. In fact, they say it twice, because they say it when he first tells his family, and then they say it again when Nephi is having the same dream revealed to him, right? So you could see it right away. Well, how about that? Joseph's just stealing the phrase, I dreamed a dream, from this very popular book, Pilgrim's Progress. Let me give you a little bit of background on the book first before we dive into some of these so-called similarities. The point of the book is that the author has this dream of someone who, the main character of the book is someone who's trying to get out of the city of destruction and make their way to the celestial city. So some critics would be like, oh, trying to get to the celestial city, huh? In fact, I read one a person trying to claim they were similar, saying like, "Don't you think it's too much of a coincidence that the guy in Pilgrim's Progress is trying to get to the celestial kingdom, and that's what Joseph Smith later said that people were trying to do?" Well, the word celestial kingdom isn't even in Pilgrim's Progress; it's celestial city, but that just shows what happens when people are desperately trying to find connections that may or may not be there. So the main character it's supposed to be a Christian allegory, right? And unlike The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's not exactly as entertaining. And the allegories, I mean, there's a reason why it's super popular. John Bunyan, much like his namesake Paul, is very relatable to his reader because he's not trying to make the allegory really difficult to understand. The main character in his book is a guy who's trying to get to this celestial city, which, follow the yellow brick road. And guess what his name is? His name is Christian. And all throughout the book, as people interact with him, people who help him on his way or prevent him on his way, they all have the name of the attribute that is the problem or the help to that person trying to find their way to paradise, right? So when he first starts on his journey, two of the people that go with him are obstinate and pliable. Okay, well, what do you think obstinate is like? I mean, if without reading the book at all, with having no idea what it is, what do you think obstinate is like?
My guess is that they're obstinate.
That's exactly right.
Oh my gosh.
So he's like, "Oh, I'm not going in here." And pliable, what do you think pliable's like?
I would say that they're obstinate.
Nope, they're pliable.
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
wow.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
I had a 50.
And so pliable is able to be convinced by Christian to go with him right up until things get kind of bad. And then someone else is able to convince pliable to go back the other way. And so he keeps introducing these characters. They're all in the story for just a very little time. There's someone in the book whose name is Worldly Wise Man. What do you think Worldly Wise Man's good at? He's good at wisdom of the world. And he's all of them trying to convince him to not keep doing what evangelists told him to do. Evangelists told him to keep following on this path. Whatever you do, don't get off of it, and you'll get to the gate that leads to paradise.
So subtlety isn't necessarily...
The reason why this book is so popular is that it's kind of an allegory, but mainly it's not an allegory at all.
Yeah, an allegory is when something means something, not when something is expressly that thing.
And so, so for instance, as he's traveling on the way, he falls into the sluice of despair, right? And he has a hard time getting out, and that causes other people to turn around and turn back. Maybe that's where Princess Bride got the pit of despair.
Oh, so that was stolen from... So many people are stealing.
I feel like everything written in the English language has been stolen from John Bunyan.
Well, I mean, so to your point on the dream to dream, that's 1 Nephi 8 and 1 Nephi 3.
Right, so it's twice that it's mentioned in there.
Yeah.
So someone might say, well, look, if it's, I mean, that's word for word. I dreamed. Where do you think Joseph Smith got that? Of course, you could also go to, I don't know, the Bible, where that's literally the phraseology that Joseph in Egypt, of the story of Joseph, it's this story, that's the way that is used, right? It's, I dreamed a dream.
It's also in Daniel chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
It's used multiple times in that chapter, I dreamed a dream.
Which is the whole reason why John Bunyan is using that language. Look, John Bunyan is not super educated. I mean, he becomes a pastor and a preacher, but not because he, went to Oxford and Cambridge. But what he is an expert in, I mean, he's basically, he's the quintessential new Protestant teacher. He knows the Bible backward and forward, and everything's about the Bible. And so, of course, he incorporates into his Christian story biblical language. But you can see how someone on the surface level says, well, wait a minute. If it says I dreamed a dream, then that just shows that Joseph's just taking that. Are there things that are similar in the books? In the most generic sort of ways that anything could possibly be similar. There's actually far, 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 far more differences. For instance, I mean, is this a dream that he's going to have that talks about, leading your family out into the wilderness to save them? Nope. It's the exact opposite in John Bunyan's work. His family's like, what are you talking about? What do you mean that you read a book that said the city's going to be destroyed, right? So there's another thing. The city's going to be destroyed. Again, in all of Christian literature, no one has ever talked about a city being destroyed or judgment coming. That's never happened. See, this is what I'm trying to point out is part of the problem with these sorts of critiques is they claim that what the Book of Mormon or Joseph's revelations are doing is just repeating oft-repeated common Christian themes. That's a good way to be critical of something, and yet at the same time, if it's something that's taught in Christianity, it's going to be repeated as a theme, right? So if Christians believe that Jesus is coming again, I don't know about Joseph Smith who's claiming Jesus is coming again. You know how many people have claimed that? Yeah, the Bible claims that. So,
Jesus claims that.
Yeah, exactly. I will come in clouds of glory, right? I mean, so in some ways, it's a type of criticism that's criticizing the religion itself and claiming, oh, well, there's no originality because, I mean, John Bunyan thought that you had to struggle to get through life to get to where paradise was. And the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith say the same thing. Almost as if that's the message of Christianity, that you have to put aside this life in order to get to the next life. So like I said, in many ways, it's an unfair criticism because the person is arguing that unless you're talking about a completely different religion, which, by the way, Joseph Smith is, almost everything that's being taught in Pilgrim's Progress is at some point being cast aside by Joseph Smith's theology. I mean, there's a pretty stark difference between what the ideas of baptism are in Joseph Smith's theology and in Bunyan's. But there are some things that are pretty direct. Let's read one passage from Pilgrim's Progress. They'll kind of give you an idea of just how there are aspects of this that can at times be a little negative. Now remember, John Bunyan is a Puritan from the 1600s. So he is not the type of person that you can easily talk about Catholicism with. For instance, at one point, they get to the valley of the shadow of death, which of course John Bunyan just stealing from the Bible.
Oh,
yeah.
I for a minute I thought you were going to say Coolio.
It was yeah. Well, and where's Coolio stealing it? From John Bunyan.
Again.
Coolio has, most of Coolio's lyrics are from Pilgrim's Progress. Most of them are.
I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison right now.
Okay, let's pull up the words and see. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I've been laughing so long that even my mama thinks that my mind is gone.
That sounds like classic John Bunyan.
John Bunyan says that. Why do you think he couldn't get his parents to follow him out of the city? In this light, so let me read part of this. In this light, therefore, he came to the end of the valley. Now I saw in my dream that at the end of this valley lay blood, bones, ashes, and mangled bodies of men, even of pilgrims that had gone this way formerly. So he's seeing the bones of people that have tried to make it and didn't make it. And while I was musing what should be the reason, I espied a little before me a cave where two giants, Pope and Pagan, dwelt in old time, by whose power and tyranny the men whose bones, blood, ashes, etc. lay there were cruelly put to death. But by this place Christian went without danger. Whereat I somewhat pondered, but I have learnt since that Pagan has been dead many a day, and as for the other, though he may yet be alive, he is, by reason of age, and also by the many shrewd brushes that he met with in his younger days, grown so crazy and stiff in his joints that he can now do little more than sit in his cave's mouth, grinning at the pilgrims as they go by, and biting his nails because he cannot come at them. That's John Bunyan's description of the Pope. We apologize to Pope Francis if...
Yeah, and the emeritus Pope Benedict and all of the popes that
feel slighted by what John Bunyan... to be fair, he doesn't say it is the Catholic Pope. He just happens to say the name of these two evil monsters living in the cave that kill all the pilgrims is Pope and Pagan. It could have been a different Pope.
Totally different. Well, and a different pagan.
Yeah, other non-Christian religions.
Yes.
That aren't pagan, even though that's the definition of pagan. Again, while it's an allegory, it is not it is not a readily clear one. So, look, what do I think of the argument? I think that there are almost no words that are similar in the books. The stories that the claims are that they are similar. Oh, there's a prison involved. What? Why don't we go read all literature that's ever existed and see whether or not there's ever a prison involved? And by the way, it just so happens to seem like with the apostles preaching an unwelcome gospel, guess what happened to them? They're thrown in prison. What happens to people praying in Nebuchadnezzar's court without permission? Prison, or furnace. What happens to Joseph and Pharaoh? The reality of religious literature is that often people trying to preach against the preeminent power, they are going to be persecuted, and that persecution is often going to take the form of prison. Now, Joseph Smith doesn't know it yet when he's translating the story of Abinadi or the story of Alma and Amulek, but he's going to be in a prison too. Not something Joseph could have foreseen as he was writing the Book of Mormon all those years. Or maybe he did. Maybe he planned that. Maybe he planned to have the Missouri government issue an extermination order. Well played, Joseph.
Well, I was going to say, so Missouri also stole that from John Bunyan.
I feel like Missouri stole the extermination order from Pope. I think that Pope and pagan.
Pope and pagan.
And then,
but the idea of imprisonment, they stole that from Bunyan.
From John Bunyan generally.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah, because John Bunyan was thrown in prison. And they wanted Joseph in there for 12 years, but it didn't work out for him. The argument that follows is made by people. Again, this is not an argument that's made by historians, by the way. There is someone with a PhD who makes arguments about Joseph having the ability to do oral tradition. They have a PhD in theater, is what their PhD is in. And clearly that
sounds like a little on the nose, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, since they're doing a nice show for everybody in their attempt to claim that's where it came from. The argument being that Joseph is a genius. It is very funny when it comes to... I
thought he was lazy and stupid.
Well, he's lazy and stupid and doesn't know anything, but also a brilliant, maniacal genius who can do everything all at once.
I see.
It is really the problem, right? Because with Joseph Smith, what do you do? The Book of Mormon appears to be completely beyond his ability. So what this person is arguing is that, well, okay, so Joseph wasn't very educated, and Joseph couldn't write very well, and other things that Joseph wrote, even after the Book of Mormon, clearly demonstrate that he has less education than's demonstrated in the Book of Mormon. But here's what Joseph probably could do very well. He couldn't have read all of these things on his own because he couldn't really read very well, but maybe he had told to him the stories of Pilgrim's Progress. He had told to him the stories of Homer, and he had told to him these stories, and then he was able in his genius mind to spout out the Book of Mormon by dictation in a way that was coherent, and so coherent that it convinced the people that were writing for him as scribes or people who were witnesses that in fact he was reading the translation even though he wasn't reading it because he was just reciting it from something that he'd memorized as a storyteller. Are you following me?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, all of that follows.
100%.
Yeah. Of course, part of the problem with this argument, and this is the reason why historians aren't making it, because what are the historical records that demonstrate this? Do you have witnesses that say Joseph Smith just was pacing around the room, dictating as he walked around? Do you have witnesses that are saying things like, oh yes, Joseph, was telling these stories, not that he was translating with the seer stones. No, you don't have any of that. Of course, the argument from the other side would be, yeah, well, that's just, he's lying to them and saying that he's seeing words on a stone, but really he's just rehearsing the whole thing that he's memorized from himself. So the argument here is that Joseph is the most gifted storyteller that's ever lived in American history, that he's memorized exactly what he's going to say, and he's memorized it so well that when he rehearses it while pretending to look at the Urim and Thummim, that the scribes think he's reading words put there by God, even though he's just telling a story.
Scribe after scribe.
After scribe.
After scribe, because he's got it memorized. He's an evil genius.
Right.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that checks.
Yeah, even though apparently such isn't the case when he does other speaking. Right? I mean, look, Joseph at times gives very, very powerful sermons. But one would not say, looking at Joseph Smith's collected sermons, that Joseph Smith was a naturally gifted orator. They wouldn't say that. In fact, many people would say that's the reason why he defaults to Sidney Rigdon, because Sidney Rigdon is a naturally gifted orator. Now, you can already hear anti-Mormons in the background going, aha, so maybe he did know Sidney Rigdon even earlier, and then Sidney Rigdon helped him with this oration so that he could give the oration. it requires a whole lot of people to be liars, but not the least of which, what about the gold plates? And this is what I've said on previous podcasts. The gold plates present the biggest problem for people trying to dismiss the Book of Mormon as anything other than what it is. Because Emma Smith says she feels and lifts and moves the gold plates. They're a physical reality. You have 8 witnesses who testify before God that they hefted and leafed through and looked at the gold plates. You have 3 more witnesses who declare not only that they see the plates, but that an angel from heaven came down and showed them the plates, and the voice of the Lord declared that the translation of those characters was correct. What do you do with those witnesses? Are they all liars? Oh, they are. They're all lying together. Okay, what's our proof that they're lying? Well, they must be, because I don't believe the Book of Mormon's true. Okay, that's great. And that's called an opinion. That's not evidence. The fact that you don't want to believe that the Book of Mormon could be from God isn't actually evidence that it's not. You have an opinion. We know what people say about opinions. Congratulations, you're entitled to it. Great, that's wonderful. But your opinion doesn't carry any weight simply because you don't want to believe what it is that the other side is saying. Here's the historical fact. There are over a dozen people who say they felt, lifted, saw, interacted with gold plates. Are they all lying? Or is Joseph in his maniacal genius so incredibly gifted that he's able to fool even people like Martin Harris, who has ready interaction with gold, to believe that the tin that he gussied up to look like gold plates just so happened to be gold? I mean, the desperation behind this is where the origination came from. I can see why this argument appeals to some people, because it's essentially an unprovable argument, and that also makes it an undisprovable one. Like, what if Joseph had read a bunch of these stories, which, by the way, aren't really similar at all? That there's a heaven involved, that there's religion involved, that there's difficulty in finding the way involved.
And a dream. You can't skip over that.
Yeah, no one's ever had a dream in all religious history. The first dream ever, right? And here I thought it was Martin Luther King Jr. I mean,
he stole that from John Bunyan.
Everyone stole everything from John Bunyan. You know, one of the interesting things about John Bunyan is trying to figure out what his literary motivations were. Because, in fact, when I first read Pilgrim's Progress, my first thought was, I bet he, this kind of idea of following this person on their journey, what does it sound like to you? It sounds like Dante's, right, Divine Comedy, where in the 1300s, Dante writes this guided tour of hell, essentially, right? And that's what it sounded like to me. And so I was like, when I first read Pilgrim's Progress, my thought was, I'll bet Bunyan read Dante, and that inspired him. Instead of doing a guided tour of hell, he's going to do a guided tour of how someone becomes saved. And then I found out, and apparently this appears to be the case. Now, I'm not a specialist in this, but as far as I know, this still seems to be the consensus. There is no English translation of Dante in Bunyan's time. So maybe he could have heard about the Divine Comedy from other people, but we actually don't have any evidence that he did. So this is the problem with finding things that have similar themes and similar ideas and just throwing the blanket, criticism up there. Oh yeah, obviously he stole that. course, the other problem is, even if there was some inspiration from these other writings, that would not demonstrate where the 600 pages of the Book of Mormon come from. Okay, so let's say Joseph Smith was inspired by Pilgrim's Progress or Dante and the Divine Comedy. Okay, so he's inspired by it. Now, where do those 600 pages of words come from? And trying to find the most delicate of slender threads of connection and saying that proves that's where it comes from, frankly, makes the argument look terrible. It's almost as bad as the late war argument, honestly. Yeah, if I take like 4 lines from this and then like 20 pages later take 3 more lines and then I like shove them together, then that like almost creates a verse that's almost the same as something that's almost in the Book of Mormon but isn't. That's where the Book of Mormon came from? You think it's this high wire plagiarism act, but not really plagiarism, but the idea comes from somewhere else, but we're not applying those standards to literally anywhere else? I mean, it to me, it's ridiculous. And that's coming from someone who has read all of the things that Joseph Smith wrote and said and did. And so, yeah, are there people who make that claim? Sure. But it's not surprising that if that's a great claim and a great argument, why aren't more people making it? Why aren't historians making it? Why not? Well, because historians make arguments that have sources. And unlike this argument, it would have to deny all of the sources in order to make the argument. Either everyone with Joseph Smith is all involved in the lie, and they keep up the lie even after they hate Joseph and they're trying to destroy Joseph, or Joseph is such a megalomaniacal, crazy genius that he is able to convince all of them that this is the case, and they're so convinced that they're even convinced even after they hate him and have left the church. But they're still convinced that he was an evil genius, right? I mean, if this is where your faith is faltering, if you're saying, I don't know, I mean, there was a prison involved and like some, miracles in both books, I think you're, I'm not saying this is not this is not what Branson's saying, but if he knows people that are really being swayed by it, I would say you're talking to people who don't really want to believe. For you to believe that the writings of John Bunyan are the actual origin of the Book of Mormon, you have to desperately want to believe that. And you're not believing in it because there's a scholarly consensus. You're not believing in it because there's overwhelming evidence. You're not believing in it because it's word for word. You're believing in it because it makes you feel good. Frankly, if you're going to believe in something because it makes you feel good, you might as well believe in the gospel rather than something else that doesn't have any evidence. Now, I want to shift to one more question we had.
Yeah, so this comes from Elder Hunt. We went through many questions that he had, but one thing that we didn't get to was one of your favorite stories from church history. I know you have many different favorites. It's like a favorite child. Actually, it might be more difficult than a favorite child.
Yeah.
Favorite child's easier than your favorite.
Well, especially if you're traveling with your children like you are now, then, the favorite child status, it just ebbs and flows so much.
It's minute by minute.
Yeah, who's talking to me right now? Dad, where are my sandals? I just told you where your sandals were 7 times. Dad, where are my sandals? That's it. Titus is the new favorite child. I mean, that's what happens. Right. If you assign the favorite child, in the moment, it helps him whip him right into shape. I'm pretty sure that's what my kids think.
100%. But so, I mean, there's so many stories from church history that you love.
Yeah, and obviously, it would be easy to take a Joseph Smith one, and frankly, I have so many Joseph Smith stories that they're very hard to say I like this one more than that one. I mean, and when we say stories, I mean, the martyrdom isn't really a favorite story of mine. I mean, it's horrific. There are doctrines and teachings that are, but one that does always come back to me because of how clearly, rarely do you get the opportunity to demonstrate in the moment what kind of a believer you are. Rarely does that opportunity come. Again, everybody's always says things like, "Oh, I'd die for the church." Well, what Joseph Smith found out over and over and over again is there's a lot of people who say they would die for the church, circa W.W. Phelps, right? But they aren't really going to die for the. Not you mean die? I meant like I'd have people say like bad things to me and stuff, but that's it. I mean, I wouldn't actually die for it. And so the one of the stories that speaks to me, there are two related stories to the crossing of the plains. The first, I want to set up the second, because the second one's more well known and obviously people have heard about it. It's the one that matters more to me. But I want to tell the first one because that helps people understand why this is a personal thing for the people involved. And that is when the saints are crossing the plains, okay? They get across the plains and they put in their crop, and the advance party then starts heading back to winter quarters. So we always talk about, the pioneers arrive in 1847, but they also go back, many of them, because they're going to go back to get the next group of immigrants to bring them back. And so as they are traveling, they are passing the various pioneer companies that are coming back. And they know how many pioneer companies left winter quarters. So as you're passing each one of those companies, okay, here's the next one, here's the next one. As they get further and further into the season, they're getting a little more worried that they haven't found the last company. They are already into September, and they haven't found Jedediah Grant's company. Where is it? And Brigham Young and his group, made up of many apostles, actually, from people from the advanced group on their way back, they will eventually, on their way back, find this last company. And by the time they find them, they're a little worried. Snow has already fallen in Wyoming, in South Pass, where they're going through the mountains. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Wyoming in the wintertime, or frankly, in June.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, What do you define as the winter?
Yeah, if I'm in Star Valley, the winter is, what is it, August? It's right now. I'm pretty sure it's already frosted several times.
That's right. No, you can't grow tomatoes there.
Yeah. You get 0 cuttings of hay.
That as we define coldness, you get half a cut.
You can't even get hay to grow. It's just 0 cuts. But so here they are in the midst of and when I say Wyoming, I mean the area that would eventually later, many years later, be organized into a territory that nobody lived in, that would eventually be organized into a state that also nobody lived in. There's no one living in this area right now. It is completely barren. The first wave of pioneers in 1847 has just gotten across it, and now they're heading back to winter quarters. So that's why they're so worried. There's 100 people in this pioneer wagon train that is so far behind the other 9 wagon trains that they're not going to make it to Salt Lake without going through snow at this point. Snow is already falling. And when they finally run into the company, they find out they've had a series of mishaps like nobody's business. They had a stampede that drove off half of their oxen, and then they spent weeks trying to get all their cattle back, and they couldn't get them. So now they're going half as fast because they have half as many animals. Then, the same day that Brigham Young's company arrived there and met them in camp, there was an Indian attack that drove off the remainder of the rest of their animals. So now they're in the middle of Wyoming, and they have no or almost no animals to pull their wagons. And snow's already falling. So now what are you going to do? And so Brigham Young is not only willing to die for the kingdom, he is also the ultimate pragmatist. He looks at his men that are on their way back to winter quarters, and they all have relatively fresh horses because their whole job was to get there quick and then to get back, not to haul, grandmother's china. Their job was to get there, get a crop in, get back. And so he tells the men that are with him that they need to give up all of their horses to Jedediah Grant's company. And then with, I'm guessing, a level of sarcasm, he said, after seeing the whole of Jedediah M. Grant's 100 on the road to the valley, at 9 a.m. I called on my council and all the returning brethren to take a walk with me to winter quarters because they gave up all their animals. Now, when he says take a walk with me, it means 900 miles to winter quarters without the horses that they'd relied on to get there fast enough that they weren't caught in a Wyoming or Nebraska or, even Iowa snowstorm. Brigham doesn't know this at the time that he makes that sacrifice, that divine intervention is going to bring more animals to them on their way back. That's part of another story. But I tell that story first to say that faced with the possibility of having to give up everything, these church leaders did it. That this is not an abstract idea. This isn't, hey, you should give things up for the kingdom of God. Brigham and the apostles and 70s and other church leaders who were with him, they practiced what they preached to the tune of what could possibly be their lives. They were one snowstorm away in Wyoming from there not being a Brigham Young. That doesn't happen, thankfully. But why did I tell that story first? Because I think sometimes when we tell the second story, which is much more familiar to you, it's very easy for people to try to find ways to be critical. Because people will say, well, why is Brigham Young telling people to go out there instead of himself? Brigham's already done this. This isn't his first rodeo. And he would have had a bigger belt buckle than you had he.
Yeah, probably not the Gadsden flag necessarily, but something.
I think Brigham would have liked a "Don't Tread on Me" flag.
I guarantee you.
I think that's kind of his bag.
Yeah, probably.
He felt like he was being treaded on quite a bit all the time. Okay, well, we're basically out of time, so I won't get to tell the major story. So the problem with telling a story in order to set up another story is sometimes you don't get to the second story.
That does happen.
Yeah, I mean, it happens, and close only counts, we know, in horseshoes and
hand grenades
and slow dancing. That's the other thing that close counts. And so, rather than try to shove all of that story into our tail end here, we'll go ahead and break. And we expect a goodly amount of listener email discussing what exactly they think Brigham Young would have on his belt buckle. And then maybe we can get Richard to get a belt buckle that looks like that.
I would be, look, I'm now in the belt buckle collecting business. I want the bigger the better for the Oklahoma State graduation.
10-gallon hat? Is that what you're taking? Or
yes. Well, it's going to be, I don't know. It'll be 10-gallon. It's going to be felt. It's very nice. I'm going to put it underneath my cap, my graduation cap.
So you're going to walk with a cowboy hat on?
100%.
Are there other people that do this?
There are.
Okay, so this is a thing at Oklahoma State.
I saw one person do it.
Was that person on their way to an asylum?
That person was actually likely a cowboy.
Yeah. Oh, so like a real one. One that doesn't drive an electric vehicle.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so we will talk about that second story that was the focus that I wanted it to be on our next podcast. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.